Welcome back to the channel, and this week is pretty simple. Get the train back on the tracks. August was a nightmare because we booked our biggest losing month ever of $2,043 in just 30.5 hours of play.
You suck, you jackass. Why don't you shut the hell up?
We ran terrible in massive pots, but also didn't do ourselves any favors with some of the plays we made.
Yeah, no shit, Sherlock.
So for this week, I'm going to keep the strategy simple so we can get back to our winning ways. Run good and book wins.
You're a genius. That's the most outstanding answer I've ever heard. You must have an IQ of 160.
To start off the month of September, we head out to the most action-packed card room in Sacramento, which is none other than Capital Casino. But before we get to today's hands, I just got to announce that I created an Instagram page and posted some reels on there for the first time with some amazing edits. I'll be posting 2 to 3 times a week with some hand histories and updates, so if you could shoot me a follow, I'd really appreciate it. I'm also hosting my regular meetup game on the Club GG app and giving away $100 to the highest stack. Links in the description below. We buy in for our usual $500 starting stack at the 1-3 match stack game and start off with losing a few insignificant pots before our first interesting hand of the day. The $6 straddle is on for this hand and 4 people call the $6. I'm in the big blind and look down at my least favorite hand in poker, which is the hideous King Jack offsuit. I feel like I could never win with this stupid holding because it's always somehow dominated by a better king. So after shit talking it, I should probably fold, but what's the fun in that? I raised to $35 since it should be ahead of most limping ranges, and we get calls from middle position in the button. 3 ways to a flop of 10-9-3 rainbow, giving us 2 overcards and a gut shot to the nuts with any queen giving us the straight. It's a pretty neutral board, meaning it doesn't favor the callers or the raisers since we could both have all the sets and 2 pairs available. So given that, I continue the aggression for $40 so we could barrel any card over a 10 for either value or a bluff. But we don't get the chance for a turn barrel because the middle position player grabs a stack of yellow and throws in a raise to $100. Now the button jams his entire stack to $140 and it's time to abort mission. I obviously tossed my hand in the muck, and I know this hand was insignificant, but I wanted to show it just to tell you guys how much I hate King Jack offsuit.
Why are you the way that you are? Honestly, every time I try to do something fun or exciting, you make it not that way.
For today, I decided not to add on until my stack falls below $300 because I want to earn the chips instead of doing it the easy way. We changed seats for a better view for my amazing audience, and the first hand up is the local famous Capital Casino $15 bomb pot. 7 people joined the party, so there's $100 in the middle after the drop, and we get dealt 9-5 offsuit. Just like every bomb pot, we go straight to a flop, and the dealer puts out a Queen Jack 9 rainbow board giving us bottom pair, shit kicker. No point in betting this, so I check and it gets checked around. There's only 5 cards left in the deck that I want to see, and the turn peels off one of them and the 5 of hearts, putting 2 hearts on the board and giving us bottom 2 pair. When it gets checked to me, I need all the protection I could get, so I throw out a value bet of $60, but one by one they all fold and we take down our first bomb pot of the day. An entire dealer change goes by of straight nothingness, so the next playable hand is another Capital Casino $15 bomb pot. 8 people decided to join, and we get dealt Queen 10 offsuit in the small blind. With $115 in the pot, we go straight to a flop of King Queen 8 rainbow, giving us a decent middle pair. I start off with a check, and action gets checked through. There's a decent chance I have the best hand since it got checked through, so when the turn peels off the 7 of hearts, I think it's time to find out. I lead for a $40 feeler bet and just get called from a player in middle position. It's possible he has a weak king that wanted to see if later positions would bet, or he has a draw like Jack 10. So given that, we go to a river with 195 in the middle and see the Queen of Spades giving us trips. Against aggressive players, I would most likely check in this spot, giving them a chance to bluff at it or value bet a worse hand, but this player leans more towards giving up on rivers with his missed draws, so I opt on betting $85 targeting all his kings, but he snap folds.
Bomb pots, just gotta get lucky.
And And I really don't care what anyone thinks, but after scooping back to back, I'm officially crowning myself the king of bomb pots.
Take this chance to apologize to absolutely nobody. The double champ does what the fuck he wants.
And I kid you not, but we don't play another hand until our third bomb pot in a row. Only 5 people joined the party this time, and for the second time today, the self-proclaimed king of bomb pots gets dealt 9-5 offsuit. We finally have position this time from the button, and we go straight to a flop of king 5 deuce rainbow, giving us middle pair. Checks to the hijack, who throws out a small bet of $20, and now it's on me. It's super hard to make a pair in poker, especially with only 5 hands dealt, so I could put in a protection raise against a weaker 5 or a deuce, but I decided to call just in case he has a king. Small blind calls as well, and I figured he'd lead out with a king, so I think we're ahead of his range. So 3 ways to a turn, which comes out the jack of clubs, putting 2 clubs on the board. Action now gets checked to me, and I honestly don't know what to do. If this was heads up, I'd probably throw in a bet for thin value, but since we're 3 ways, I decided on the low variance route and just check. River is no help to us after it peels off the queen of clubs, bringing in the backdoor flush. Small blind now leads out for a super small bet of $30, and my live read was that this sizing felt super weak and he was going for thin value. So when it folds to me, I know my weak 5 is never good in this setup, so instead of folding, I decided to put our opponent to the test and raise to $115. My goal with this bet was to fold out all his weak 1 pair holdings, and maybe even some 2 pairs since river raises are such an underbluff spot. Our opponent goes in the tank, and at this point, I was super confident the self-proclaimed bomb pot king was about to go 3 in a row like MJ in the 90s.
Jordan has come up with another steal. Michael Jordan puts on a show.
But that's not what happens because our opponent ends up putting in the chips. I turn over my hand knowing I'm beat, and our opponent turns over ace-10 of spades for the rivered straight. Definitely didn't see that hand in his range, and after failing that bluff attempt, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson thinks I was a little too cocky earlier and has a message for me.
Shut up, bitch!
After that hand, we're down $150 again, but no worries because this next one we get dealt one of our favorite holdings. The $6 straddle is on, and early position raises to $26, and I'm in the big blind and look down at the beautiful ace-3 of diamonds and put in the call. Straddler calls as well, and we go 3 ways to a flop of 6-5-3 with 2 diamonds, giving us bottom pair in the nut flush draw. We check and flow to the razor, and he throws out a c-bet of $45. Action's back on me, and in my opinion, all 3 options are on the table. I could obviously call, could raise, and could go all in. But I don't want to call since we're out of position and I want to gain the betting lead. I don't mind going all in, but I feel like stacks are awkward and he'd put me on a draw since it'd be such a big raise. So I settle on option 3, which is to raise. If I had top 2 pair or a set, I think I would raise since I'd want to get immediate value from his overpairs. So I raise to $120 and he ends up putting in the call. In my opinion, this condenses his range to either an overpair or a worse flush draw and not much else. The pot has ballooned to $315 and I have a little over $200 in my stack. Turn is the 4 of hearts, which I thought was the perfect card that didn't make our hand. If I was semi-bluffing with 7-8 or 4-5, which would both be in my range, they now have overpairs crushed. So I use that amazing turn to go all in and put our opponent to the test. He goes deep in the tank, but eventually puts in the call. I turn over my hand like I always do when I'm all in, and I tell him I'm gonna need some help. River peels off the 6 of hearts pairing the board, and our opponent turns over pocket jacks for the overpair and we get felted. I thought my line was best to maximize fold equity, but let me know in the comments what you guys would have done. Well, my stack has officially fell below 300 and it's time to add on. We add on a full rack of $500 and we're now into the game for $1,000 total. I get moved to the main game, and unfortunately the only spot available was seat 1, so my apologies for the view. A couple orbits went by before I finally picked up a playable hand, but there's an action player who's been playing all night and he's been raising literally any 2 cards 90% of the time. So he opens the action to $15 in middle position, and I'm on the button and get dealt ace-9 offsuit. This is a fold every single time against normal opponents, but not today since I'm way ahead of his opening range. I raise to $45 in position to isolate him, and he puts in the call as expected. Going heads up to a miracle flop of 998 rainbow, giving ourselves top trips. He checks, and I throw out a super small bet of $15 trying to make my hand look weak. He snap calls, and we go to a turn which comes out the 6 of hearts, making this board a lot more connected. He checks again. Now I size up to $80, charging all his flush and straight draws, but he eventually folds after a little thought. In this next hand, there's 2 limps in the field, including the action player, and I raise king-queen offsuit to $25. Both limpers put in the call, and the flop comes out queen 9-6 rainbow, giving us top pair second best kicker. Great board for us, so when it checks to me, I throw out a $65 value bet, and just the action player calls. Pot's up to $205 now, and the turn is the 9 of spades pairing the board. He checks again, and I feel like I could bet, but he could easily have a 9, and if I check, I could give him rope to bluff his missed draws on the river. So the river peels off the 8 of spades, and now he bets huge and throws out a bet of $5 whole. Don't really know what to make of this. This table has been going overnight, and we're all having a lot of fun, so I throw in the massive raise to $10. He turns his hand over and shows 10-8 offsuit for rivered pair and calls it off. I turn over the winner, and somehow I think we might have gotten max value. Next hand up is once again the local famous Capital Casino $15 bomb pot. 5 people join the party, and I get dealt Jack-10 offsuit on the button. Going straight to a flop of 10-9-4 with 2 spades, giving us top pair decent kicker. The action player from the last 2 hands throws out a $40 bet in middle position, and I don't think there's anything to do than just call. I feel like a raise is an overplay, and I'm obviously never folding. Everyone else gets out of the way, and the turn is the king of hearts, bringing in an overcard and giving us a gut shot. He now slows down and checks, and I think checking back here would be a huge mistake. I don't want to give his flush draws a free card to improve, and if I bet here and don't improve, I could just simply check back my showdown value. So I throw out a $65 value bet, and he folds right away. But just like that, we're back to our true self and winning bomb pots again.
Surprise, surprise, motherfucker! The king is back!
There's no straddle on for this hand, and the action player opens to $25 in the low jack. Hijack and cutoff both put in the call, and I look down at ace-king offsuit. Well, only one move, which is to put in a raise. I make it $125 since I have position, and just the action player puts in the call. The pot is already sitting at $300. We're going straight to a flop of queen 7-5 with 2 clubs, giving us 2 overs and a dream. They say you're never supposed to bluff a super action player that calls light, but I didn't 3-bet in position to check this back. So after he checks, I throw out a standard c-bet of $125, which is the sizing I would use with all my value hands, and he tosses his hand in the muck, which I'm perfectly fine with sitting here with ace high. A few orbits go by, and we get dealt pocket 8s under the gun. I open them to $18 and get calls from the button, small blind, and big blind. Flop is pretty gross and Jack 9-4 with 2 spades, giving us third pair. After the blind checks, I check, and it gets checked around. Turn is a 9 of hearts pairing the board, and action gets checked through once again. River is a nice looking deuce of clubs, which should be a blank, but now that action player in the small blind leads out for $40. I didn't see him checking back a jack or a 9 for 2 streets, so I basically snap call, and the button folds. He turns over 6 deuce offsuit for rivered bottom pair, and I turn over the winner. Guess he was value betting? Either way, this new table has been unreal so far, and we're making a massive comeback after being down over $500. But unfortunately, time isn't on our side because 2 o'clock is quickly approaching, which is when we always leave, We only have about 15 minutes left to pull off an epic comeback, but we might have the chance to because I put on the $6 straddle and there's 2 limps in the field. The action player now raises to just $15 on the button, and I look down at a premium in pocket jacks. There's no right way to play them, but I'm in a dream setup with this guy just making it $15. So I raise to 70, but now the first limper goes deep in the tank. Earlier in the session, he limp re-raised with kings and aces, so I'm just praying he doesn't do the same thing. Instead, he eventually decides to put in the call for $70, and so does the action player. The guy who limp cold called is pretty snug pre-flop, so I'm basically putting him on pocket 8s through pocket queens and ace king. Not much else. Opposite to that, the action player could literally have any 2 cards, so in order to complete this epic comeback, we're going to need a favorable flop. But that's not what we get when the dealer throws out a king 10-8 2-heart board, giving us second pair. I start off with a check, and now the tighter player in early position just ships his entire stack of 450 into a pot of just 220. Action player folds, and when it gets back to me, I let him know what's on my mind.
Ace king good.
And our read was spot on because he turns over ace king offsuit. A good flop would have gotten us into the land of profit, but I guess it just wasn't meant to be. Off to the outro.
After a horrible start to the day, we had a great opportunity to complete the comeback when we got dealt jacks in that last hand, but we simply got outflopped. In for 1,000 and out for 758 for a $242 loss. Hopefully day 2 goes a lot better.
The first hand of day 2 starts off with none other than, you guessed it, the local famous Capital Casino $15 bomb pot.
Can't wait.
We get dealt queen 10 of clubs, and we're going straight to a flop with 85 in the middle, and the board runs out ace king jack with 2 spades, giving us the nuts. Checks all the way to me, so I throw out a value bet of $50, and we only get action from a player in early position. Pot sitting at $185 now, and the turn isn't the best card in the deck, and the 4 of spades bringing in the front door flush. Not really loving it, but when he checks to us again, I think there's still value to be had from all his big pairs. So I throw out a bet of $90, and once again he puts in the call. I think big flushes would have raised on the turn, and his 2 pair holdings might have even let out on the flop. So I think he's weighted towards either small flushes or a pair that thinks I'm full of it. There's $365 in the pot, and we go to a river which peels off the king of hearts pairing the board. Wasn't a fan of this card since not only do we already lose to flushes, but now some 2 pairs make a full house. I was hoping our opponent would check and I could snap check it back to get to showdown, but instead he now leads out for $150. Like I said earlier though, I think his 2 pair holdings might have let out for protection on the flop, so I decided to just close my eyes and put in the call. He turns over king 8 offsuit for river trips, and that's one of the few value hands we could beat. We turn over the winner and scoop in this massive pot to start the day. In this next hand, under the gun limps and I raise pocket 8s to $20 next to act. We get calls from the player to our left, big blind, and the under the gun limper. Going 4 ways to a flop with 80 in the middle, and for the first time in 4 sessions, we finally flop a set. Checks to me, and since there's a flush draw available and I'm unblocking top pair, someone is sure to connect with this board. So I throw out a nice small $35 value bet, but one by one, they all fold.
Son of a bitch!
Things didn't go well for the next hour because we kept losing those annoying little pots that just chip away at your stack. So we get moved to the main game with 580 in our stack, so we're up exactly $80 on the day. There's 3 limps to me on the button, and I look down at ace king offsuit and raise the price of poker to $25. Only the first limper calls, and the flop comes out ace king jack with 2 spades, giving us top 2 pair. He checks to me, and I'm never slow playing on a board this connected, so I throw out a value bet of $35, to which he quickly calls. He could have a ton of holdings ranging from a weak top pair all the way down to a flush draw. So with 120 in the middle, the turn peels off the hideous 10 of hearts, putting a one-liner to the straight. He checks again, and I think there's merit to betting to get value from his flush draws and worst 2 pairs, but I decided to just check back my showdown value and see what he does on the river. River comes out the 10 of spades, bringing in the front door flush, and this board just got worse and worse. Our opponent now leads out for $100 even, and I just snap fold. He turns over Jack 9 of spades for the rivered flush, and we lose this decent pot. I guess I could have bet the turn for protection, but either way, he was never folding a pair with a flush draw. After losing that hand, along with a few other swing and misses, we're officially stuck on the day after being up $300 early. So all that jazz I said in day one of not adding on until my stack is below 300 is just simply out the window. I reach into my wallet and pull out 7 large ones to compete with the big stacks, so we're now into the game for $1,200 even. 2 o'clock is quickly approaching, which is when we always leave, so it's make or break time. For this hand, there's 2 limps to me, and I raise 8-7 of diamonds to $20 in middle position. Folds back to the limpers who both put in the call, and with $60 in the middle, we hammer this flop when the dealer puts out an 8-3 deuce 2 diamond board, giving us top pair and a flush draw. Checks to me, and I throw out a value bet of $35. Only the second limper puts in the call, and I think his range is pretty condensed. Since he didn't raise, his range consists of better flush draws, possible better 8x holdings, or straight draws like ace-4, ace-5, and 4-5. Not much else. So with 135 in the middle, the turn peels off the 4 of spades, and I was expecting our opponent to check again, but instead he now leads out for under a half pot bet of $60. This bet kind of threw me off, and to me it felt like a stop bet with a hand like ace-4 or 5-4 who just made a pair and wants to see a cheap price to improve on the river. So I could raise, but my hand doesn't really need much protection since I have a backup with the flush draw. So I decide to just call and see what ensues. There's now $255 in the pot, and the river pairs the board and the deuce of hearts. He gathers his thoughts for a bit, and then throws out a pretty big bet of $135. I don't really know what to make of this, because I figured all his 4x hands would check the river and try to bluff catch, so now his half pot bet feels super value heavy, and I feel like I'm beat. But at the same time, would he really lead out for only $60 with a straight on the turn, or not check raise his sets on the flop? It's not really adding up to me, and when the line doesn't make too much sense, I tend to stick in the call. So I put in the chips, and he says the best words you want to hear when you're making a questionable call, which is, you're good. So I turn over the winner, and we scoop in a pretty sizable pot with just a weak top pair.
Thank you.
We played a few more hands, but nothing significant really happened, so let's get to the outro.
Definitely wasn't pretty, but we finally booked our first one in ages. In for $1,200 and out for $1,256 for a $56 win. I'll take it any way I could get it at this point.
As for this week in poker, we played a total of 8 hours even, and unfortunately booked a net loss of $186. But if it wasn't for bomb pots keeping us afloat, this week could have gotten a lot uglier. But I feel like we made some solid plays this week, and our game is gradually improving. I'm definitely starting to feel more comfortable playing deep stacked, which makes me super excited to get back on the felt next week and see what we could pull off. But as always, I hope you guys run good at the tables, and I'd appreciate it if you could hit the subscribe button to help me reach my new year-end goal of 10,000 subscribers.